BBC Radio Scotland.
24 minutes to 8 now. You're listening to Good Morning Scotland. Now, some 16 months ago, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon spoke at the annual conference of the Federation of Small Businesses in Glasgow about a review of business rates in Scotland.
We do know that some aspects of the business rate system are still a source of concern for some of you. The FSB's manifesto, for example, argues that the current system can sometimes discourage investment and that it should be simplified. So there is a case for making changes, and we recognise that case. That's why we announced last December that we will conduct a review of business rates to ensure that the system is as fair and as effective as possible. And I can confirm to you today that Ken Barclay, the former chair of RBS Scotland, has agreed to chair the Review Commission for us, and that commission will recommend changes to the business rates system.
Well, this morning Mr Barclay is due to publish the results of that review. Let's talk to the Scottish Conservatives' Murdo Fraser, who's also a member of Holyrood's Finance Committee. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, in the past, you've accused the Scottish Government of being anti-business, but surely by commissioning this review, it proves that they are, looking out for the interests of business.
Well, I very much welcomed the fact that the Barclay Review had been established at the time, but it's clear that something needs to be done to improve the situation. Even before the revaluation that was announced at the end of last year, there were problems with business rates that we're well aware of. What the revaluation led to was a situation, as we heard on your programme earlier, where some sectors, particularly hospitality, were very badly hit. Some people seeing increases of up to 400% in their bills, and giving a very clear message that if that continued, then they might not be able to survive in business. Now, the Scottish Government acted to their credit to bring in a one-year cap on the increases in hospitality, set at 12.5%. Actually, it ended up being 14.9% because they forgot to add in the inflation factor. Now, that's fine, but that runs out in April next year. And what businesses, particularly in hospitality, but in other sectors too, want to know is, what is the Scottish Government going to do to address a business rate system that simply is not fit for purpose, and what changes can be recommended to try and improve the environment to help our businesses grow. And
when you say it's not fit for purpose, what exactly is wrong with it?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, this is effectively like a 19th century tax. It's based entirely on property values. So if you have a property, for example, a hotel...
It's not entirely on property values, is it?
Well, it depends on the sector. I mean, the basis of the valuation is nominal rental value, but there are different sectoral approaches. But if, for example, in hospitality you have a hotel and you invest in that hotel and you upgrade it and you improve the quality of the bedrooms and so on, you will face a higher tax bill. So there is a disincentive to businesses to actually go and invest and improve and expand. And similarly on retail, we want to encourage the regeneration of town centres. If you have a town centre retail business, you can be hit with a very large rates bill. If you have an out-of-town retail premise, you'll be paying a lot less. If you're running an internet retail business, you might be paying nothing at all if you're running it from your spare bedroom or your garage.
So what would you propose then to make it fairer in that sense?
Well, this is really why the Barclay Review was set up, to look at a number of different options, and I'm very interested to see what they've got to say. There's a number of possibilities. There are process issues that could be looked at in terms of business rates. Do we need to have regional assessors across Scotland? Could we not have one unified system with a unified approach? Is the 5-year cycle of revaluation the right cycle? Should that be looked at? Or do we need to do something more fundamental and replace business rates altogether with a different form of taxation, which could be, for example, a turnover tax or a sales tax, as happens in other jurisdictions? And I hope that the Barclay Review has actually looked at all these fundamental questions in some detail and will then be able to give politicians the opportunity to properly debate and consult with businesses and industry as to the right way forward.
Murdo Fraser, thank you very much for speaking to us this morning.
Hello again. The Scottish Government commissioned Sir Ken Barclay, the former chairman of the RBS, to chair the review into the reform of business nature. Now, some firms, particularly those in the hospitality industry and the northeast of Scotland, claimed the new revaluation rates, which came into effect in April, were unfair, in some cases out of date. Well, businesses have until the 30th of September to appeal their revaluations. Well, Graham Mogford is director at the Bridges. That's a family business business that runs 2 large nurseries in Aberdeen, and he was told his business rates were to go up by 78%. And I wonder, Graham Mugford, good morning to you, how you felt when you saw that figure.
Yes, good morning to you. Yes, we were pretty appalled at an increase of 78% that was initially proposed by the assessor, and we immediately petitioned politicians and the media to raise awareness of this. And at the last minute, before the rate rises were finally announced, we were set at 48%, which, although a reduction, is still a very, very large increase in our outgoings. We are in the course of appealing that, of course.
Yeah, and how confident are you that that appeal will go through?
Well, we're not confident at all, because the whole system is very complicated, and even the specialist surveyors we've appointed to represent us have difficulty in explaining it to us.
Yeah. When you had that, obviously it's a big increase in your bill. What are your options? Do you pass it on to parents, or can you cut costs?
Well, no, we are a very heavily regulated business, as perhaps you're aware, with the Care Inspectorate and many other bodies, and possibly we're one of the most regulated industries around. We have fixed numbers of staff, fixed numbers of fixed areas of buildings. We can't adjust our business model at all to cater for additional costs. So it all has to be fed through, and at the end it comes out in the only variable we have, which is fees charged to parents. Yes.
What are you hoping to hear from the Barclay report then today?
Well, I fortunately met with Mr. Barclay earlier this year, along with the Chamber of Commerce, who organised a group of different commercial enterprises to give him their view on what's happening locally. And I think there was a unanimous call for fairness and transparency in the system, which is not there at the present moment, and also a system which reflects an actual ability to pay this tax.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning.
Scotland's business community is awaiting a major review into the way business rates are imposed. Since March, Ken Barclay, the former chairman of RBS Bank, has been investigating potential changes which the Scottish Government could use to collect the tax. Speaking earlier on the programme this morning, Scottish Conservatives' Murdo Fraser told us there are fairer ways business rates could be imposed.
There are process issues that could be looked at in terms of business rates. Do we need to have regional assessors across Scotland? Could we not have one unified system with a unified approach? Is the 5-year cycle of revaluation the right cycle? Should that be looked at? Or do we need to do something more fundamental and replace business rates altogether with a different form of taxation, which could be, for example, a turnover tax or a sales tax, as happens in other jurisdictions?
Joining us now is the SNP's Ivan McKee, a member of Holyrood's Finance Committee. Morning to you.
Good morning.
Gosh, a number of options put forward there. I mean, do you accept that something has to be done about business rates to make them fairer?
Well, the issue, of course, is that if you make changes to the system, then there will be winners and losers, and the losers obviously are all much more vocal than the winners, and that's always the case.
I guess if you'd had a 400% increase in a taxation you would pay, as we saw proposed earlier in the spring, then you would be vocal as well.
Yeah, of course, but of course there isn't a 400% increase. There's a 12.5% cap on the increase, which was what was implemented.
Only because of the criticism.
Well, that was what was implemented when the situation was looked at. As I say, you've got a system where we raise money through business property, and if you make changes to that, there will be winners and losers. Now,
is that the right way to go about it, do you think?
The whole point of the Barclay review is to have an objective look at the current system, understand by talking to businesses, vested interests across a whole range of the economy, to understand what is the best system and what changes they propose to the system to drive the maximum economic growth in the system and to encourage the maximum amount of investment into business and the economy. So I think that's the right approach to take. The Scottish Government is taking, to let the Ken Barclay in his review have the time to decide, or to make the recommendations from talking to everyone who's involved, and let's see what they come forward with.
Indeed. I mean, let me just ask you though, at this point, I mean, if the review suggested perhaps a complete change from a system based partially on valuations, on property valuations and rental values, would you be willing to accept that?
Well, let's see what they come forward with. But you've got to remember, I mean, if you talk about wider taxes on business, there are taxes on profit. It's called corporation tax, and that's reserved to Westminster. There are taxes on sales already. It's called VAT, and that's reserved to Westminster. There are taxes on employment.
But you could tweak how this particular
insurance.
tax is calculated.
Yes, absolutely. Of course,
it is within the government's gift here to do that.
And that's the whole point of the review, to see what Ken Bartley comes back with, and then to make changes based on that.
So would you be willing to move away from a property-based valuation to something else if that were a recommendation?
Well, as I've already said, those already tax systems are already in place and they're controlled by Westminster. They're not within the scope of the Scottish Government. We already have a sales tax. It's called VAT.
So you couldn't. So property tax is the only way you think this can be calculated.
Well, this is a review of property tax, and that's what we're looking at to see what the fairest way to do that is. And obviously, you've got different sectors that have got different requirements and different approaches. And where there has been issues, for example, the hospitality sector was particularly badly hit. The Scottish Government stepped in to mitigate that, where the north east of Scotland, because of issues with the oil and gas sector, were particularly hardly hit. The Scottish Government stepped in to mitigate that as well. And the one interesting comment that Murdo Fraser did come up with was he said he wanted to centralise the assessors, which normally when the Scottish Government wants to centralise something, the Scottish Tories are the first people to jump up and down and complain about it. And it's
well, is it a bad idea? Because the Federation of Scottish Businesses also suggests that there are too many assessors.
It may well be, but let's see what comes out of the recommendation. But as I say, it's interesting that the Scottish Tories are calling for us to centralise.
Well, it's interesting that businesses are calling for it. Forget about political point scoring. The fact that businesses suggest that it's something that's needed. I listened to what the FSB said this morning. He said that there was a discrepancy because there was 14 regional assessors and 32 councils. Yes.
But it wasn't clear if he was calling for more or less assessors or to align it with the number of councils. But what they did say was that the system should be more transparent. And again, that means you get into a situation where the system is complicated by virtue of the fact that we have got reliefs which benefit small businesses or are focused on mitigating the impact on specific sectors.
Yeah, and when you have to do that, does that not suggest that the system does need changing? You've got big business supplement, small business bonus schemes, charitable status, all these different things which do suggest a system which, many companies would say is so complicated they don't quite understand
believe me,
it.
If we took all those reliefs and support mechanisms out of the system, you'd have far, far more people complaining about it. The reason those supports are in there are because specific sectors do have specific issues caused by the economic circumstances, be that the oil and gas impact in the north east of Scotland, which we recognise, and if we didn't have those reliefs, then we'd be back to where we started, which is you talking about 400% increases for certain businesses. So they're there for good reasons, and you're dealing with the real world. And if everything was so simple and we could wave a magic wand and implement a very simple system that nobody complained about and everybody would be happy about, of course we'd have done that by now.
Well, no, Dee, but if whatever, are you saying that
system that reflects the reality of the economic situation? Now, the fundamentals there are the review, as I said at the beginning, to look at what do you need to do to maximise the growth in the economy and what do you need to do to maximise investment in the economy. And we believe those are the two fundamentals that should be driving this review.
Well, I'm sure Ken Bartley will have that in mind. Can you reassure businesses that whatever recommendations come out of this review, that the government will be willing to implement?
Well, let's look and see what comes forward. And of course, we're coming up to the budget process, which is obviously a negotiation between the parties because of there isn't a majority government in the Scottish Parliament, and that will be fed in and considered by the government as part of the negotiation through the budget process.
Thank you very much for speaking to us this morning. That's the SNP's Ivan McKee there.